of his official residence to speak with them. But then Pilate had Jesus brought inside the praetorium so he could question Jesus privately. The trial of Jesus before the governor is thus played out like a drama on two stages, outside the palace and inside it. This enhances the dramatic nature of this account, and it shows how the Jewish leaders were not able to hear Jesus' explanation of the nature of his kingship, which he gave to Pilate. It also brought it about that much of the trial was held out in the open, outside the normal courtroom. Pilate did not simply judge Jesus, but rather he came out of his palace and opened the judicial proceedings, as was his duty, by asking them to state their charges against the man whom they had brought before him. The leaders, however, balked at Pilate's request for the charges. Instead of following normal court procedure and stating the charges, they demurred at his request and said, "If he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." They wanted Pilate to simply agree to their verdict and ratify it without further questions. Perhaps, as was customary, they had conveyed to Pilate an outline of the case in advance and hoped that he would be satisfied with this and conduct no further inquiry. But a Roman official had complete discretion in deciding how to exercise his authority and investigate a case, and then they had to accept his decision. Since the Jews had apparently tried Jesus and found him guilty, Pilate told them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." But the Jews objected, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." Now the truth came out. They wanted the death penalty. It's likely that Pilate knew very well that they were bringing a capital charge against Jesus, but they had not said so formally thus far, and he pretended not to know this. Now it was clear, however, that they wanted Pilate to also find Jesus guilty and order his execution, for the right to impose the death penalty had been taken away from the Jews by the Romans. The Jewish leaders did not dare to defy the Roman law of the land before everyone in Jerusalem, and especially at the time of a festival when the watchful eyes of the governor were present. Thus we see by this how the Scripture was about to be fulfilled. For the Jews were not allowed to execute Jesus. The Scriptures and Jesus himself had predicted by what sort of death he would die. Namely, he would be lifted up, as Jesus said in John 12, verse 32. The law of Moses did allow the death penalty, but knew nothing of death by crucifixion. But instead they punished blasphemy and similar violations by stoning the criminal. But if Pilate found Jesus guilty, he would be hung on a cross, which was the Romans' way of executing criminals. John 18, verse 33. Pilate then went back inside the praetorium and summoned Jesus. He asked him, "Are you the King of the Jews?" Now Pilate knew what he was dealing with. The charge against Jesus was very serious. The leaders of the Jews accused Jesus of being a false Messiah, and for Pilate's understanding, they translated that as claiming to be the King of the Jews. Pilate didn't ask Jesus, "Do you claim to be the King of the Jews?" But instead he asked, "Are you the King of the Jews?" His question shows that the claim of Jesus to be a ruler over Israel seriously concerned Pilate, for anyone who claimed kingship in a Roman province denied the sovereignty of Caesar and was guilty of sedition against him. Verse 34, "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, or did others talk to you about me?" Jesus, by asking Pilate if this was his own idea, or just something others told him, was telling Pilate that it made a big difference if the reason for his asking was the result of his own personal observation, or was it just an accusation by others that he wanted to verify? Was this Pilate's own personal question? If so, that would mean that there was a personal, emotional involvement by which he sees something in Jesus, in which case it could be the beginning of personal faith. Jesus treated Pilate as a man who should ask and consider for himself just who this Jesus person is. For who and what Jesus is also involves Pilate, and brings either life or death to him, that is, to Pilate. Since he must exercise judgment over Jesus, he cannot just listen to what others say about him, but must give thought for his own personal benefit or loss. No one can treat Jesus impersonally and sit in judgment over him. We are the ones whose fate is at stake when we are confronted by Jesus. How we decide concerning him is a matter of life and death for us